Finally, we get to see F1 cars on track. It's been a long time. We finally get to enjoy some actual proper testing. But what has every single team brought here? What's different from the renders and the launch cars, and just stuff that we have not noticed on these cars? I'll tell you right now, it's a lot of changes for the whole entire grid, and we're about to go over every single change that's been brought here for testing day 1. More and more parts are going to be brought from testing day 2 and 3, and more videos are going to be made on not even just the parts, but overall the changes being made to the cars and talking about Formula 1 in general. So if you're new here, please subscribe to the channel. It would mean the world for me. You guys have been supporting the channel absolutely amazingly, so thank you so much from the bottom of my heart. Thank you. Let's get into all the real upgrades that have been brought here to the teams. I want to go over every single team, and I want to start with this beautiful picture from the top. So look at McLaren, Aston Martin, Ferrari, Red Bull, and Mercedes. And to me, it just shows what a difference we have in these philosophies still 3 years into the regulations. Now, obviously, some have converged to a more Red Bull classic setup in the downwashing side pods, and every car here is actually a downwashing side pod. So, yes, that is one thing that is similar, but there's different philosophies from the front wing to the rear part of the car, how they're cooling the car, and just so many changes that need to be talked about in general. The actual Red Bull car is an overbite with so many different changes. I'm keeping Red Bull towards the end of the video because they have brought the most amount of stuff and are still hiding a lot throughout the testing period, and we know more upgrades are coming to this car. But speaking of that, let's get into the first team that I want to cover that actually revealed their car in a shakedown yesterday. It is the Williams team. So we probably have the clearer shots of the Williams, but this shows you how much they've changed the floor from 23 into 24. As you can see, they actually have a floor edge, which was something that the Williams was lacking for a very long period of time. And if you look closely enough, the actual underfloor with the Venturi tunnels, you can see that that is also significantly changed. The actual barge board on the side of the floor has significantly changed as well. The overall layout on the floor is bigger to that of the 2023, and the actual side pod undercut has changed as well. A lot more closer to what the AMR 24 is right now. Looking at it even from the front angle, you can see that this front wing has changed significantly. It almost reminds me of what the AMR 22, the original version, actually funny enough had. And the actual front wing end plate, if you look at the side, it's a very odd shape for that front wing end plate, that little curve that's put onto there for aerodynamic gain. Instead of it being the usual kind of just little S with nothing really under it, they kept the under part, and it's pretty bulky in size in comparison to what we've seen on the grid. This is definitely a change up. I don't really know how much it's going to add, but it is something new to the car. The actual front nose of the car is much flatter, that closer to the Alpine. It does not connect down to the bottom first wing element. It's separated from that. Like most teams, has a little hump into it, kind of like the Mercedes. So keeping it with Mercedes, at least in that end. But another part with the Williams car that is actually quite shocking. So yes, they picked up the front suspension off of the Mercedes. They didn't pick up the rear. Now that to me shocked me. And what do I mean by that? Because they have to pick it up. Like, oh, they're a Mercedes provider. They have to go with that. They actually kept the pull rod suspension from last year. Now, I don't know what they're thinking through this and where they found that aerodynamic gain to be most useful. My thought process is they stuck with it to upgrade the car as much as possible from 23 into 24, and that pull rod suspension was working with the gains that they were making. But yes, it looks like Williams is part of 3 teams on the grid with a pull rod rear suspension. I really hope they find a lot more momentum in this. I don't really feel that confident in saying they will, but we'll have to see. I mean, a lot of teams are in the push rod. I do think push rod and pull rod doesn't make that big of a difference. But for Williams' case, it could not. I'm very eager to find out, but why they stay there, I'm not sure. And lastly, on the Williams car, these slide pods have significantly increased. It is to that of the level of the AMR 23. Next team I want to go into is McLaren. We're going to start with this up top image. When you look at the car, it's not changed too much. It does seem like in-season development is going to be another thing that they're going to engage into again this year. Maybe a lot of their resources went into that second half upgrades of 2023, but especially looking from this top angle, you can't really see much change. We now see the floor that was blurred out, it doesn't look that much different to last year's floor. Not that much change. Still, the floor edge might be just a little bit more changed. The engine cover itself is a bit bigger to that of the 2023 car, and the slide pod has significantly been decreased to what they had before. The biggest difference in this car, and kind of what I think has been, I guess, their focal point for this car, is the side pod inlet. And I thought we were going to get much more on this car for that, but no. It really is just kind of like this little wing that comes out, very similar to that of the W14, with its side impact structure being part of that part. So they had to have that front wing to help out with the side pod. Kind of looks like that. I can't really say much. It does cause vortices in that part. I don't know what they're thinking. It is an overbite like that of the RB20, but that is the biggest changes when it comes to this car. They haven't really changed too much on this car, but I guess that is the biggest one, that the side pod inlet shape has changed itself, more similar to that of Alpine back in Baku in like of 2022, but they've also added a overbite to their car and less of a slide pod for this 2024 McLaren. Looking at some also better pictures of the Aston Martin, another team that has not brought stuff, but better pictures of what we were looking at. Now, as we look at the actual side pod inlet, this is the most extreme we've gotten of an underbite onto any side pod, even more extreme to that of the RB19. It's its own level right now. The actual front suspension was practically made to be able to get air into here to give it that cooling. They don't have any cooling gills presently on the car, which I find funny because it is Bahrain and cooling is required, but the car seems to be running at a very good pace. A huge undercut as you see the car. The side pod is actually disconnected completely from that of the floor. There's no connection to the floor at all going from the front of that side pod to the rear part of that side pod. And as I said, no cooling gills, 4 floor edges, which to me is pretty shocking. At least the cuts into it, they didn't have that of last year. The actual front part of that floor still looks the same to me with that little kind of part they added to bring in that inwash to that part of the car. The barge board of it has changed as well, and we can't really see it from this picture, but the actual floor fencing on the bottom, those Venturi tunnels, have been put out further than before. The front wing is another big change to the Aston Martin car itself. It's a lot more similar to that of the Red Bull. It's funny, I've been seeing articles on how Grosjean talked about the car and how it's a Red Bull copy. I don't think it's a Red Bull copy. I do think it has some parts, but of course you're going to go with the Red Bull car. That was the best car last year, so you're going to pick up on some of those philosophies. Now, the actual rear part of the car has been hidden, and we still don't have any great shots of the rear part of the car. There are some stills that I'll put up on screen that some people have captured of it. It does seem that there is a change into the diffuser. Somebody caught in a shakedown video that little wing that they had for Zandvoort of last year. I made a whole entire video talking about how this wing itself is going to be something that everybody adds. Well, actually, in fact, it's not something that I think people will be adding because of the whole entire pit stop issues that they were having of before. You can also see in here that they've changed up the engine cover from that of the launch car and even on the shakedown. They're seeing whether they want that actual shark fin to be there, whether or not. It will be changes that we're going to see continuing throughout testing. Now, real quickly, something that's been added onto the Mercedes car and theories are kind of coming out for it and so on. It's not something I think is going to make that big of a difference, but there is this little cooling, I guess you can call it, duct on the front nose of the car. And it's actually on the Red Bull as well. No, this is obviously not going to be like an F duct because it's illegal to perform that type of action with that on the car. But I think it's going to be a form of cooling to the drivers, hitting them face on. I think that's what it is for both Red Bull and for Mercedes. There's not really much more information onto this. There is a better picture also of that front wing element that they have that's connecting it. It is legal. That is what the FIA says now. It is legal. The rumor teams have been Red Bull, Aston Martin, McLaren, and that of Alpine have kind of tried to fight this front wing element that they've been added to the car, but it is legal and deemed legal by that of the FIA. Now let's get into the biggest team, and wow. I mean, there's still more to this car, but let's talk about the Red Bull. So firstly, let's start off from the front wing. The actual front wing part of this car is pretty much the same as it was that of last year. It hasn't changed that much in philosophy. They've been one of those teams that's been keeping this front wing so simple, but yeah, it's been bringing so much air to the back of the car. So why change it? The only part that is different is that the nose actually connects down all the way to the first front wing element, which it's pretty much like the only car on the grid right now. I think Stake also has it like that as well. But yeah, they're the only car that has that. You can also see in this picture those two ducts that I was talking about. You can see them just briefly here. I'm going to circle both of those for you. But let's get to more side part of the car. Now, when you look at the side here, yeah, it's pretty extreme even from this view. The first things that we can notice is obviously that inlet is right there. Now, this is a S duct. It is not the side pod inlet. The side pod inlet is actually what most people are calling kind of like a shark bite, that overbite in the car. As you can see, that side pod is pulled out a lot to be able to overbite that car, and even dipping down just by the slightest bit to promote more airflow to go over the car rather than under the car, at least for when the air is hitting that part of the overbite. The overbite itself is very small. The actual side pod inlet is very small for the car, and this is very interesting to see where the airflow is going from the S duct. Now, the undercut is still very prominent. The floor edge has changed significantly for this new car because it is as Marco calls it, a small revolution for the Red Bull team. And the biggest things, and something that is still a mystery, and I think it will stay a mystery till more stuff comes out in the season, maybe depending on how much more they open up for the car too. There are these cooling gills that are on the side of the car. Very odd looking if you ask me, at least the positioning of them is. They do have a slight slide pod now. This was covered on the car, but at least in the launch renders and the launch car itself, it was covered. We knew they were covering that. They covered the floor as well. But the biggest talking point I think is going to be within the engine cover. There are actual inlets on this engine cover. They're not like part of the S duct, which I was originally thinking till I saw more pictures on it and before I started making this video. They're inlets. They're inlets to air being distributed somewhere else into the car. Now, the thought of this is that it's inlets for losses that are being made up there in that engine cover part. This is a huge change to their engine cover. You can also see, if you look closely, the cooling gills in the engine cover are right there, pretty much like the Mercedes car as well. But there is still no confirmation of where these inlets are getting out, really. Now, the theory and what most people are probably going to talk about, and what I think, is that most of this is going to come out towards the back of the car. I already talked about it, where I think the S duct is going to come out as well. Just more airflow being promoted to the back of the car, like it was on the RB19, except it was done through the side pod inlet, and now it's being done through a S duct, and maybe the top of the engine cover bringing more air down. I do think the significance of it is going to lie in between that engine cover and side pod design, but we will have to see. This is pretty much all that we've gotten for all the parts that have came for testing day one. I'd love to hear your thoughts down in the comments below. Please leave a like, subscribe. It would mean the world, and peace.